Awesome. Thank you everyone for coming. I know a lot of you maybe didn't get as much notice as you would have liked, considering our newsletters didn't exactly go out on time, but it's great that so many of you made it down. So we're just going to give you a small bit of a presentation tonight in regards to our Eastern Bay Shared Path, Tupua Nuku. We've got a few people here to talk to you through design, construction, environmental, and some other aspects. I'll just hand over to Michael for a karakia. So.
Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa puna mo te moana, he hurahi, mā tatu I korangi nei, aroha atu, mai, tatu I a tatu katoa, hui e, taiki e. First slide. Good evening all, kia ora. Michael Shazon, I'm the project manager for Hutt City Council delivering Tupua Horo Nuku. So Tupua Horo Nuku is the scope of the project is going to be a new shared path, including new seawalls, 4.4 kilometers long between Ngau Matau, Point Howard, to Makoromiko, Windy Point. It will be delivered as 6 bays, but the focus at the moment is delivering the first 2 bays, which is Sunshine Bay and Makoromiko. Construction is confirmed to begin in a few months. Detailed design have been completed for these first 2 bays. We've got issue for construction drawings. So we are undertaking service investigations as well. You might have seen some hydrovacs doing investigations. So that will run for a few weeks, after which we will do some service relocations, the power poles on Sunshine Bay. The precasts are underway as well and looking at delivery later this year. So by late 2022, we'll be constructing the first seawalls at Windy Point, Makoromiko. Again, the project is being delivered by the Tiara Tupua Alliance. So Hutt City Council is working alongside Waka Kotahi. The last 2 weeks ago, the Tiara Tupua Alliance project agreement was signed between Waka Kotahi, Downer, Heb, and Tonkin and Taylor. So that marks the establishment of the alliance, and they are delivering Oranga Kipitooni in parallel to Tupua Horo Nuku. So we've got a great team on board, so we are gearing up for construction. Thank you. So just an aerial background in terms of the project. So from Point Howard all the way to Makoromiko. So Mark Foster, who's the design manager from the Tiara Tupua Alliance, will give a background on the design of the project.
Tēnā koutou, everybody. As Michael said, my name's Mark Foster. I'm the design manager for Tiara Tupua Alliance. And I just wanted to give a brief update on the progress of the design over recent months and also a little bit about where to next. So we have, as Michael said, we've completed the design for the first, what we call the first 2 bays, or Sunshine Bay and Makoromiko. And what that's really been has been an evolution of the consent design, which many of you are probably familiar with. Most of what we've done is in the engineering detail that sits under the ground and in how we make it all stand up and how we make it work and how we build it. So most of what we've done is probably invisible, even though a lot of hard work's gone into it. But I just thought I might highlight some of the things that you might see that might be slightly different to what you had seen previously. So one of the things we've done, it's not super clear in this picture, but we've got a much larger landing between the levels of the wall now, and that was around providing safety from falling. So the idea behind that was it reduces the need for balustrades and also increases safety for users, so they don't have as far to fall. Next slide, please, Molly. We've also done things like introduce path markings, as you see here. They kind of got a dual function around trying to give it a little bit more of a look and feel to the path, bring in some cultural narrative to the project, but also located strategically at stairs and landings and access points as a bit of a warning for cyclists to slow down because we've got some junctions coming up. Next slide, please. And we've also developed the detail of the balustrade. There are sections of the path where we need a balustrade for safety reasons, and we've been working pretty hard to make that as unobtrusive as possible. So the process that we went through, because understanding that some of you may be from Sunshine Bay or Windy Point, but you might be from the other areas as well. The process we went through this is in terms of community involvement. There's a lot of acronyms on here, so I'll explain what they mean. Is through what we call the BSUDP, which stands for the Bay Specific Urban Design Process. So that's a process of working through the urban design elements, the things that we think that the community are interested in. And what we did with those two bays, and we'll do again with the others, is first up we do what we call draft protocols, which is a document that says this is what we think it's going to look like. It's still a reasonably high level document because we don't want to get too caught into the detail before we get feedback, and we send that to the community for feedback. So previously we sent it to the community groups, the East Harbour Environment Association and the Community Board. And then we get that feedback, and then we provide feedback on the feedback. So we either respond by saying, yes, we'll make these changes, or thanks, but actually we can't make the changes for these reasons. And then that's a very transparent process, and at the end of that, we carry on with the design, and we also finalise the Bay-specific urban design plans. Bit of a mouthful. So that process will be followed again for the other bays. And all going well, that should happen in November, December this year with the other bays. And just the next slide, please, Molly. These are some of the outputs. So this is I'm not expecting anybody to read the detail here, but these are the plans for, this is Sunshine Bay, and the next one is Windy Point. Yeah, gotcha. We'll see what we can do. There we go. Don't read the detail though. So these plans are now or very shortly will be going live on the Hutt City Council website, which are the more detailed plans that sit within that urban design plan. So you can see, kind of look a bit more closely at the design for those two bays, but do it in your own time because this is obviously a bit hard to read. So that's just to let you know that either now, Ted, or very soon, they'll be up on they are now. They're on the Hutt City Council website. So that's the update from design, and I'm going to pass over now to John. Okay.
Kia ora koutou. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Kingsbury. I'm the Head of Transport at Hutt City Council. Just before I talk about this, I just want to acknowledge the experts in the room. The alliance that's been put together for both Tupua Horo Nuku and Te Ara Tupua is amazing. We've got the best of the best people. We've got the real experts on this, so couldn't be prouder to be associated with either of those projects, with having such great people involved. I'm going to talk a little bit about the resilience benefits of this. So, very topical, obviously, and I recognise a few faces from last week around the corner when we had a climate change event. So the project will improve the resilience of Marine Drive through the new seawalls, and some of you may have seen the wave testing a month ago or so, which we can talk about that a little bit later if anyone's got any questions. But basically pushing the waves back out rather than bringing them in. The new seawalls will be less prone to damage in comparison to what's existing. Also have the potential for future resilience upgrade. I mean, we know climate change is real, obviously. We know resilience is a key thing along the eastern bays. So it's not going to solve everything, but it will help, and it's a starting point. As sea level rises and storm surges get higher, we need to look at future things, but this is a basis for that future. And as we said here, more work's needed to adapt, and we're looking at that as well. But this is going to make a big difference, and it's also going to provide, as we all know, a much needed and long overdue shared path from Eastbourne through to Point Howard. Not sure who's next. So over to John.
Evening, everybody. My name's John Pritchard. I'm one of the construction managers working for the Alliance. So this is what our next 12 months looks like. Through the rest of rest of August and into early September, we're going to be doing underground service investigations from here up to Point Howard. So we've already done a bit of that. You'll have seen us out there last week. We've got about halfway through that now. We are doing some hopefully geotechnical investigations in and around Lowry Bay and York Bay towards the end of September. We will also be relocating the overhead power lines in Sunshine Bay, again, hopefully late September. And we are looking to start work in Mar Coromiko in October. Each bay will take 5 to 6 months, which takes us through to sort of August next year. And hopefully by which point we'll be straight into the northern bays. Next slide, Molly. So what does our construction look like? Job number 1 is to remove all of the beach material from underneath our footprint. Give us a nice foundation on the wave cut platform out there. We'll be digging a small scour curtain into the front of the seawall, you can see here. Once that's done, we've got a good foundation and we start pouring concrete in the hole basically. So we've got an unreinforced concrete foundation that we pour into that, and on top of that we have the precast units that Michael mentioned earlier. So they go in the front, they give us our temporary formworks, our permanent formworks and a nice finish on the face of the wall, and again more concrete in behind that. Once we're up close to the level of the existing road, we slap a pavement on top of it, and that's pretty much job done for us. Next slide. So how are we going to do this? This job's really easy to build if it was in a field. It's just a big concrete slab. But we're stuck between a pretty gnarly marine environment and Eastbourne's only road access. So we're going to be setting up a permanent lane closure throughout the duration of the job. So the lane closure is going to be anywhere between 200 to 300 meters long. And this gives us space to work our lifting machinery, our concrete trucks, our delivery trucks for the precast. So we're going to be skinnying up the traveling lane down to about 3 meters. So whatever we need to do to get the buses through. Out on the seaward side, we're going to be using a temporary barrier that we're bringing up from Christchurch. So the intention is to dampen the wave action and give us as dry a site as possible so we can build this thing as quick. Slide, please, Molly. The traffic management. So as you'll see on some of the cheat sheets knocking around, during peak times and working times, the traffic management is going to be manned. So we'll be able to manage the ebbs and flows of the traffic depending which way they're going. And outside of those working hours and outside of those peak times, they're going to be automated signals. To help us get our trucks turning around and we don't have to drive through Eastbourne, we're going to be installing a temporary roundabout at the junction of Marine Drive and Marine Parade at the north end of Eastbourne. That stops us having to drive trucks into Eastbourne because there's nowhere to turn around otherwise. Molly, next slide. I'm going to hand you over to Ed, our environment manager.
Good evening. Just got to check what this says. So this is really just identifying some of the key things that we're interested in environmental management here. Our risks, or what we're trying to avoid, is interfering with penguins, variable oyster catchers, straying beyond the construction zone, keeping it tight, not bringing in any contaminated materials, so making sure the fill that is used on the back behind the wall is all clean fill. You won't see any site sheds or anything like that en route. The boys are going to live out of a ute and a trailer, and then they'll have an actual construction yard down in Seaview. So again, it's to minimise the potential. And it should be a very clean site. John assures me there will be absolutely no rubbish to be seen. And one of the consent conditions we do have over the duration of the construction is to do regular sweeps through the beach area from the start of the project to the finish. One of the things we're also going to do is benchmark noise and vibration before we start, so then if people feel there is an effect, we've got something that we can compare against. Next slide, please, Molly. So bird protection, that in the consent phase, this became one of the important things that the Eastbourne residents were really keen on ensuring. So we cannot work immediately adjacent to a nesting penguin area. There's a setback provisions, there's monitoring requirements. We have to do sweeps with penguin dogs before we start. Similarly, as we get further to the north, then the variable oyster catchers come in and there's potential for them to be breeding. So again, there's exclusion zones that we have to put in place and monitoring. And I think if we go to the next slide, one of the important things is that in looking at these environmental activities, it's been done in conjunction. In the resource consent conditions, there was a series of provisions in there. One was the creation of bird protection areas, 3 of them, and a prescribed amount, I think it's $300,000 to help fence those. There's pest control to work with the local pest group here. There's also a variable oyster catcher study which is also done by the local environmental group. And one of the things is also looking at education. So there's a 10-year education program also has to be incorporated. What we're looking to do is try and fast track the establishment of the bird protection areas. So there's one at Bishop Park and one at Short, which is looking in that dune area. To help do that, we have to form a thing called the Little Penguin Group, which has sort of got the local interest in this, plus sort of ecologists with their specialty being in penguins. So we want to formalise the design of that. There's already a preliminary plan being prepared, but we've had some feedback that it could be better, so we're just going to look at that. I think that's the main thing from my perspective, and I think the rest of the team, we're really looking forward to starting work on this project. It's an exciting project, and seeing how it links into the other section we're doing between Naronga and Petone, the end result's going to be really exciting. Thank you. Who's next?
Cool. So my name's Molly. I'm the Stakeholder and Communications Advisor for Tupua Horo Nuku. So I'm just going to run you through some of the ways that we will be trying to keep you informed and aware of what's going on. So we've already got an 0800 number set up for the project, which is written up here and is also on the newsletters that hopefully you've all received by now, along with our project-specific email address. We also have a website linked to the Hutt City website, and on that you'll find a lot of the documents we've talked about tonight. The BSUDPs are on there. Once it's confirmed, the bird protection plan will go up there, some of the visualizations and some things along those lines. We'll also be sending out a physical newsletter, hopefully every quarter, with some updates on what's going on. And we also have an email newsletter, which you can subscribe to via the website, or we put some sign-up sheets on the table at the back over there. We'll be putting out regular social media updates via the Hutt City Council Facebook page, as well as newspaper advertising in the local news, the Eastbourne Herald and the Hutt News. You may have seen that already. And we'll also be putting some signage boards up throughout the project site with some details. They'll also have the 0800 number and the email address on them, and there'll also be some other information about what's going on. I think that is basically everything from us. So we now have about 15 minutes for some questions that the team will answer, if anyone has anything.
Rod Stewart's manager heard that version of the song, and as a last bit of addition to storytelling.
Awesome. Was it at the back here, sir? So what was your question?
It's John Butt. The design of the barrier and the ecological impact of erosion doesn't seem to have been kept to the forefront. I've seen 3 designs of the barrier, each one slightly different. The lower edge of the barrier is sometimes a vertical wall, sometimes it's almost flat, and sometimes it's just a little step where you've got the key that holds the barrier in place. I'm sure you would have read Jim Darm's reports on erosion, especially in Eastbourne, that was prepared for the Hutt City Council 10 years ago, pointing out that a vertical wall creates erosion situation. And I'm really concerned that the design is changing towards having a bit of a vertical wall at the bottom of of the curves. I think the curves will probably work over and drop the sediment, but the vertical wall will not. And I'm really concerned that the design is doesn't seem to be very clear about the impact of that vertical wall.
So just to be clear, so when you say erosion, are you talking about erosion at the base of the wall? Yeah. Yeah, cool. Okay. So we've definitely taken that into account. I think if you recall, John, when he was talking, you could see that little, we call a key into the rock. That's what that key is there for, basically. So the wall is founded, all of the wall is keyed into the rock, because the rock is quite shallow. So that's why we dig out the sand at the beach, so that we make sure we key it into the rock. And that rock is quite hard, and we've got a key that's about this big. So it basically, whilst those rocks do erode with time, we're talking hundreds of years into the future before that rock would erode down to that point. So that's how it kind of keeps it in place.
I'm sorry you've missed my point slightly, and my fault. I understand the point of the key, and what I'm concerned about is erosion in front of the wall. A good example is that the Makoromiko Bay used to be sand all the way to the road. And that vertical wall has created an erosion situation that has completely eroded all the sand. So it's nearly 3 metres of sand. Now, there is still sand there, but of course that's all going to go if there's a vertical wall left. And I'm talking about the key actually being the vertical wall. Not very high, but enough to cause erosion.
All I can say, look, there's been a coastal process assessment that's been done that sort of that the modelling kind of shows that beaches fluctuate with time, and what it is, it's not actually the vertical wall. It's not having a sand source. So if you've got a cliff, the waves hit the cliff, erode some of the cliff, and redeposit new sand there. So whether it's vertical or whether it's on an angle, it's actually having a hard engineered structure is what causes that. And so I suppose there's hard engineered structure along that whole coastline as it is at the moment, and so we're not actually making that any worse than it already is.
True, but we could make it better. We've got an opportunity to make it better, and we shouldn't make it just say, oh, we can do the same. You know, the fact that they made it really bad 50 years ago doesn't make an excuse for making it the same again.
Yeah.
We really need to look at taking this opportunity, because I think it's a simple solution.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. I'm just going to, if you want to email us, we'd be happy to go back and forth with you about this for a bit longer, but just to give everyone else an opportunity to have some questions.
I will just say, just briefly, I think I can kind of hear what you're saying, but we're kind of traversing, there's many things that got us to this particular point, which was a couple of years ago, and we can't traverse old, the counter is that you have more reclamation or whatever it might be to counteract that, and there's a fine balance that's been reached, and so happy to talk about it offline, but it is old kind of stuff that's already been closed out previously.
You have a question here?
Just a quick note on that. The red lately is that seawalls were thought to cause erosion in front of the vertical surface because of the sand, being turned around. But they have found in a lot of American studies that in fact it just goes out and comes back in again. So as you say, and as we did worry about that, but it's not so much a worry now. More the case is that something solid is in the way of sand being cycled, and that's true anyway because the road's there.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so it does come and go.
Yeah.
You had a question over here, sir?
Yeah, kia ora, I'm Quentin Duffy, candidate for Greater Wellington Regional Council. My question is, with any project like this involving heavy machinery next to the marine environment, there's a risk of fuel spill or other chemical spill into the marine environment. So I'm interested in what's the containment and remediation and that sort of, what's the processes in place to lower that risk and then to fix it if it happens. Kia ora.
That's a very good question.
One of the things we have to prepare in advance of starting work for certification by the Regional Council is our Construction Environmental Management Plan, which we're just finalising at the moment. So in looking at the issue of contaminants from fuel or other hazardous products in the construction process we're addressing, the refuelling, we'll have no fuel stored on site. It will just come in on a daily basis with a mini tanker which will have a set filling regime. There will be a spill kit available at all times, with also a boom to pick it up and a contingency, and then a requirement in that to ring the Regional Council's hotline, and then depending on the size of that, then it sort of triggers the whole regional or national response to the spill. The other thing we're doing is going to minimise the vehicles which are down in that, so there'll be mostly just one as it excavates and then puts it back up onto the road. And then there's also a requirement to daily inspection of vehicles to make sure they're in good condition. And that also talks about the exhausts as well, so they have to be quiet, running efficiently.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions over here?
Just a question about pavement quality. The existing section of shared path that's been around in the southern part of York Bay for some time, from day one it had a very poor pavement. It was up and down, and it's remained that way and got even worse. And I think in part that was because the actual section to be paved was too narrow for a conventional paving machine. So I would hope that this construction results in a better standard of final finished pavement.
Question in there? Yes. What would that be? Just wondering what the quality of pavement's going to be like. John, feels like a question.
It's probably more me. Yes, no, we're good there. So the shared path, we have an average width. It will vary, but we have an average kind of edge-to-edge width of about 3 metres, which fits a paving machine, and we have we've got a hard concrete edge on the roadside, and we've got the nib of the wall on the seaward side, so we've got something to butt up against, because often that's the problem if you it's probably, as you're pointing out, right on the edge there. And one of the other things we've actually looked at, this is more applicable to the northern bays, is also where you have a lot of overtopping, the rate of that overtopping is actually asphalt pavements also don't cope too well with that, so more so in the northern bays where we've got high rates of overtopping, we're currently proposing a concrete footpath instead of asphalt for that reason as well.
Awesome. Any other questions from the back?
Sorry if it's been said before, but just going right back to the two or three times a year, or not designed.
No, unfortunately not. So the returns, the curves that you see, they act to kind of push the waves up as opposed to sort of directly across the road. But really, you need to raise the level to reduce the amount of the frequency of overtopping, and that would require raising the road, which is, as John alluded to earlier, is a longer term aspiration and a longer conversation. But the design as it stands at the moment, effectively, the waves in some sections they now kind of like shoot across the road because there's almost a ramp that helps them do that. These will shoot them up in the air, but then obviously with the spray from the wind, it's still you still have a reasonable amount of overtopping, and those events will happen just as frequently.
I'm Stan. I've been here about 30 years, and just to follow up on that, the southern end of York Bay has, in fact, that may well be representative of it there, has to me been very successful with its reverse curve to slop the waves back on themselves. During the recent serious surges, that area was virtually untouched. Is that, in fact, going to be the recipe for the rest of the wall, especially around Windy Point? Yeah,
so we've got those same curves, and they help in certain waves, but not all wave climates. And we've tested it in the laboratory and found that they do return the waves, but when you get a really big day, it's kind of like the small to medium ones that gets pushed that way, whereas the larger ones not so much.
Any more questions? Yes.
Can you talk about aerial width?
Do you want to
Are you planning to have a narrower shared path in the small bays?
I can't recall exactly what the widths are in the various places, but no, it's more about the constraints between, it's a very constrained site, as you know, and so we're looking to maximise path width, but where we have a larger fall, because we have those steps on the walls, it narrows it up. But on average, and it's reasonably consistent on the northern four bays and a little bit less consistent on Sunshine Bay and Windy Point, but on average, we have about a 3 metre clear width, which in technical terms is referred to as sort of a 2.5 metre usable width, because we consider if you're on a cycle, if you're on a bike in particular, the edges, sort of people don't stray into those areas, but the clear width is about 3 metres consistently. Sometimes it's a bit bigger, sometimes it's a little bit less.
There are problems with that, aren't there? Given the fact that we have tiny beaches and the fact that we have bus stops. And so the shared pathway I know best is in New Plymouth. And there are parts of that that are very wide near the city, but there are parts of it that become down to 1 metre because it makes sense for that area. Surely we could do something similar here and retain the bus stops where they are, makes sense, and hopefully we'll get a crossing to our bus stops, and have the path go in front of the bus stop, because it's not going to be 3 metres wide. It could be 1 metre or 1.5.
I think that's something that when we go through the bay-specific urban design process and we can go through the plans, that's the sort of stuff we can work through then. We are trying, from a pure transport perspective, obviously there's desirable to have a wider width, but there are areas where there's trees and bus stops and the like where we do have constriction. So I think that's probably to be worked through at a detailed level per bay.
Yeah, I guess that's important for us, because we are the minority alongside this path. And another shared pathway I know is in Otago on the peninsula. And they have incorporated trees and, in fact, gardens all the way along the shared path. So that's another way of looking at it.
Awesome. Yeah, we will be going through the full process for the Northern Bays as well, so you'll have plenty of time to comment on the designs at that point. Do I see another question over there, sir? All right.
Well, this is a question that I should know the answer to, but I've decided to ask it anyway. What is the meaning, the significance of Tupua Horo Nuku?
Anybody want to do that? Michael? John? Do you want to do it?
That should be a question for you,
I'll give, apology, I'll try and give an abridged version. So the creation of the Whanganui Atara, the harbour, was created by in sort of mythology, by two Tupua, and one is called Horo Nuku, and the other is called Whaitaitai. And the Tupua Horo Nuku, so the Tupua, whose name is Horo Nuku, was down this eastern side of the harbour, and Whaitaitai went down the western side of the harbour, and that's why this part of the path is referred to as Tupua Horo Nuku.
Yes.
Road bikes travel at about 25, 30 kilometres an hour. Will this pathway be suitable for them?
Yeah, I feel like someone else needs a turn. So we do have what's called the design speed that we designed the road for, and because of how narrow it is, being a shared path, the design speed is 20 kilometres per hour. So what that dictates from an engineering perspective is there are certain curves and sight distances, and obviously if you're travelling faster, your sight distance is less. So this is designed as a 20 kilometre per hour path. We can't stop people going faster. Hopefully they go slower. But that's what the sort of, in terms of safety design and sight lines and those sorts of things, it's a 20 kilometre per hour path.
One of the things we all sort of feel when we're passing these guys on these road bikes is that very, very narrow in places and they swing out and it's very, very dangerous. So how do we get them onto the shared pathway rather than on the road?
Build the path and they will come. That's the theory.
Question over here? Yeah.
The information talks about adding a wall later on. The walls I've seen perhaps might be 1/2 metre wide at the base. Has allowance been made on the pathway for what you might call the intrusion of a wall onto the pathway? If it's going to be plonked on top and it's 1/2 metre wide at the bottom, that's 1/2 metre off the width of the path.
Correct. Yep. So no, that, but ultimately, well, so there's two ways to protect, to raise it. You can have a barrier so that the road stays at its existing level, and that doesn't reduce the path width. Or if you raise the road, you're kind of looking at a much bigger kind of infrastructure piece that kind of is rebuilding the road anyway and reimagining how wide that path is, and that's a bigger piece.
This is not your area, but we've all experienced the storm damage around the bays this winter. Who and when is someone going to make the decision to build a wall?
Thank you for that question. We're not in a position to make that decision yet. Those discussions, as we start looking at resilience across the city, we'll start looking at that. But this is the design we have at the moment. But also just to back up what Mark just mentioned, we wouldn't, in the future, we're not looking at reducing the width of this path. We want more people walking and cycling. We don't want less. So we don't want to go any narrower. So we'd need to look at other options in the future. So.
Cool. Yeah.
Very quick one. Could we ask that the concrete riprap be removed as you go around the bays? Because, people just accept it now, but it would be nice if that went, and if you could cut it away that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Awesome. I think we've got time for one more question. Yeah.
Firstly, well, the part that's had the highest media profile is Lowry Bay throughout the country, actually. And I'm just wondering there about what you're going to do. That's one question. And the other is about beach replenishment and what's going to happen about that, because as you widen that wall and it will encroach on the beaches get smaller. And I have heard, went to the climate change meeting, and the first speaker was a leading expert internationally, and he talked very precisely and with very good research to back him about that as a real concern. And it's the biggest concern in Wellington Harbour, and I have actually spoken to other experts about that, leading experts. So can someone answer that?
So just to clarify, the first question was about what we're doing in Lowry Bay, and the second question was about... Yeah. And the second question was about beach replenishment.
I'll answer the first part. So, as we kind of mentioned earlier, we've designed the first 2 bays. As work will start shortly around the remaining 4 bays and how they will be designed. So a little bit early. So, but in terms, in case we get a question, we haven't. Whilst the original thinking was we'd go in order from here back towards Point Howard. That's not necessarily. We're not sure yet. We need to work through that. So. If a bay like Lowry Bay takes a little bit longer to design because of the environmental, the resilience and the special nature of that bay, then that might not be next. That might be a little bit later on. But we're not at that stage yet. Yeah, that's not me.
You're right. Beach nourishing the beach or having more sand on the beach is beneficial. And apologies, I can't remember exactly which beaches it is, but where there are 3 or 4, Michael, of the beaches as we move around in the northern bays, where beach replenishment is, or we call it beach nourishment, is proposed for exactly the reason that you pointed out.
Just from an environmental point of view, where will that beach replenishment come from?
Aha.
Come from Golden Bay or not? No.
I'm looking at 3 local sources. I haven't settled on one yet. Sorry.
Would one be the Golden Bay? Because that wasn't being... No. That's what, yes or no?
Where's Golden Bay?
It's in the South Island.
No, I'm definitely not importing beach material from the South Island. I'm looking at 3 local sources.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your questions, guys. If you do have any more, you're welcome to email us on the project email. Yes.
Well, just to follow up.
One last question.
Larry Bay, this is surely the elephant in the room. What is planned for Days Bay?
Good question. Great one to finish off. So, as I'm sure you're all aware, Days Bay isn't one of the 6 bays that's within this project. I'm not sure why that was long before I got here, but those decisions were made. Sorry about the feedback. We are looking at Days Bay separately. So there's a Williams Park project looking at Williams Park. We've also got we've done some initial thinking around the area between the wharf and Williams Park and what they might mean in terms of crossings. So that work has been started. I can't give you any timeframes on that yet, but it is underway. The design thinking. So. Is
it being separately funded?
Yes.
Has that funding been assigned?
So we've got funding. Sorry, I keep giving feedback. We've got some funding to do some design within council, but in terms of conversations with central government, not at this stage yet.
Awesome. We just had one final question about the overall timeline of the project, when we're expecting to be finished with all bays. If anyone wants to answer that one.
All being well, I've got to get this right, February 2026?
Awesome. Yeah, we'll call it there on questions, guys. Thank you again. Like I say, if you do have any further questions, you're welcome to email us and we'll get back to you. We also have the 0800 number set up, which is on the website or on our newsletters. And like I say, we'll be sending out email newsletters fairly regularly, so feel free to sign up there. I'll pass over to John Kingsbury for some closing remarks.
Hope I haven't turned it off.
On? Okay. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. We realise the amount of interest in this project in the community. Long overdue, as I mentioned earlier. It's great to have so many passionate people in the room who want the same thing as us. We want this to be successful. Hence, we've got the best team that's possible to get. So, and we look forward to keeping you up to date and talking to you throughout the process. As Molly was saying, plenty of ways to interact with us. We want to make sure we don't drown you in information, but you have lots of options to keep up to date. So if there are any questions, feel free either on the phone or via email or those other mediums. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. This is an outstanding turnout, so really appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. I think Michael's just going to give a closing karakia.
Kia tau te mana kitanga, kia runga ki tēna o tātou. Kia piki te ora, kia piki te mana matanga, kia hoki pai atu, kia hoki pai mai. Tuturu whaka mauna, kia tina, homie, huie, taikie. Thank you. Kia ora.
Let's go home.